Okay, I'm just gonna hope this works, and if it doesn't, I'm giving up. No more video. Star Wars The Bad Batch is an American animated television series created by Dave Filoni for the streaming service Disney+. It is part of the Star Wars franchise and a spin-off from Star Wars The Clone Wars, continuing from the end of that series to depict the aftermath of Order 66 and the end of the Clone Wars. The Bad Batch follows a unique squad of clone troopers with genetic mutations who resist Order 66 and go on the run in the early days of the Galactic Empire. They are joined by Omega, a young female clone. Okay, picture this. It's 2020. You're locked in your room, sad because you can't see your friends. What was once meant to just be a couple of weeks off school has now turned into several months trapped inside your own home with nothing to entertain yourself but your own mind and imagination. And then, Disney Plus, they release the previously cancelled final season of Clone Wars. This is where we met Clone Force 99, also known as the Bad Batch. They were introduced to us in 2020 in the first episode of Season 7 of the Clone Wars, and people, myself included, have been captivated ever since by their story. But what exactly was it that had everyone so interested? That's what I'm explaining to you. You should have read the title. You're getting an earful. Hi, I am Diggs. I don't know how to start this video because it's my first one, in case that wasn't already obvious. I hope you don't find me terribly annoying and that you might consider coming back if this is any good. Welcome. Hope you enjoy yourself. Take a seat. Probably put this on in the background while you do some art or clean your room or something, because it's going to be really long and I'm going to talk a lot. So, get excited for that. Alright, first order of business. I'm going to give you today's agenda, alright? First, we will be going over a short, brief kind of introduction / analysis of each of the characters. Then we will be exploring the themes and ideas of the show. Then we will be looking at the show's strengths and then weaknesses. And then we'll be answering the question of what exactly is it that had everyone so hooked on this show? Myself included, once again. I should probably say that this is going to be a little bit biased. I can't pretend that I'm not going to be completely glazing this show. So, do with that what you will. So, before we get into things, we're going to start with a question that bugs me to no end. How old are the Batches? It's not exactly confirmed, right? So the clones, they are, as we are told in Attack of the Clones, they roughly age at 2 times the normal human amount, which is based off of a single comment in a movie, and we're just going to stick with it, right? Because if we don't, then it gets complicated. So we know Echo is the oldest. He is a Gen 1 or 2 clone, making him about 13 by the time of the Bad Batch, but 26 in human years. Omega is slightly more complicated, as well as the other batches, because we are told that Omega was there when the other batches were created. She held them when they were babies. This complicates things because the batches look to be at least in their 20s. Honestly, they look older than that, but we'll put it down to living through war. So them having to be at least 10, roughly, means that Omega would have to be in that little bracket there. She would have to be either 11 or 12. Most people put it at around 12 because she has to exist after Echo, but before the Batches, but she has to be old enough to hold them, which means we're going to say she's about 12, which is fairly accurate. She does seem to be a little bit younger, but again, she has lived on Kamino her whole life. She's been pretty sheltered. So we are going to say that she is 12, meaning that the Batches are 10 and therefore 20, which Doesn't feel quite right, but it's the closest we've got to a canon age for all of them. Uh, which, honestly, them being in their 20s does kind of explain a lot of the chaos that is caused. But regardless, that's what the general agreement is. Let's get on to the actual character analysis now. Alright, first on the hit list for character analysis is Sergeant Hunter. Sergeant Hunter was introduced to us at the same time as the other core 4 batches in 2020 in the first episode of season 7 of the Clone Wars. He is shown to be this very strong, imposing character. He's the leader, he's the sergeant. His arc revolves around parenthood and learning to be a good father. This takes its form in Omega predominantly, but it also does show in the other batches. With Omega, it's very much about learning to parent a young girl when Hunter has never really had any experience with little girls. I mean, he grew up on Kamino, surrounded by his brothers. So he didn't really come into contact with women, like, almost at all. I mean, there's Nala Se and the other Kaminoan medical personnel, and there's Shaak Ti, the Jedi in charge of the clones. But other than that, little to no female contact. So Omega is this very kind of foreign person, she's not the same as his other brothers, It's this very new and unfamiliar territory. So he has to learn to deal with this. This is very clear, I think, like, the growth of Hunter is very clear when you see, let's say, episode 2, right? Cut and Suze, right? Omega, she goes out, she throws a ball over the fence. The adults say, it's okay, we'll get it later. Omega disobeys this, goes out, nearly gets hurt. Hunter instantly goes into lecture mode, which is presumably what he's used to with his brothers. He lectures her, he says, what were you doing out there? What were you thinking? You could have been hurt, you could have been killed. And he lectures her as if she's a soldier. Cut calls him out on this and says, hey, she's not a soldier. And this is this very pivotal moment for Hunter, because where he was once very commanding and very tough, he has to learn to soften up a little bit. We see this progressively throughout the series, where once he was very strict on Omega, he's now much more loose. When she gets hurt, his main concern is whether or not she's hurt, and not how it's her fault or why she was being irresponsible. He learns to be a father, and then you see this growth, like, so much. You see this growth in the final episode of The Bad Batch. There's this flash forward into the future, the prologue. He sits down with Omega. She wants to leave, and he says, you're our kid, Omega. He's sad to see her go, but he knows that he doesn't have to protect her anymore. And it's this long, arduous process of growth that I think makes Hunter's character arc so interesting. And he's going from this tough shell, like, think any Pedro Pascal character ever. It's the reluctant father trope. He learns and he grows and he becomes a good parent, and by the end of it, you've got this character who was once so tough, and he's so different, but still the same. He's very clearly been deeply affected by what has happened to him and his family, and he just wants to settle down and have a bandana. He loves those bandanas. Anyway, I've been talking for too long about this. So, TLDR, Hunter has themes to do with parenthood, growth, mourning, but that's a general theme, and we're going to get into that later. We're going to get into it later because it's going to drive me insane, but that's a story for another day. He very much is all about growth and learning to be a parent. And I think that this is the reason that, like, many parents and their children would watch this show together and really bond over it, which I think is very cool and very awesome. Me personally, my dad wouldn't watch it with me because I would sit there and obnoxiously quote the entire show. My dad introduced me to Star Wars, and he's never known peace since. And, I just really appreciate that. Anyway, we are going to move on to Omega. So, Omega was first introduced to us in the first episode of The Bad Batch. Omega, as a character, is very naive. She's bright-eyed, she's ready to learn, and then by the end of the series, she's very much been affected by what has happened to her. She's a child who's been stripped of her childhood. And on that note, I would really like to talk, just for a moment, about the Omega haters, the anti-Omegas, if you will. There was a large percentage of the Star Wars fandom that really, really didn't like Omega for a while there. And I would like to point out that many of these people were men, specifically older men. This is what many call, or not many, a few, I've seen it around, the Ahsoka effect. So I do want to make a video about this on its own, but I will give a brief covering of my feelings on the topic. So the Ahsoka effect is essentially a term used to describe when typically a young female character is brought into a show as young and naive and, a young girl, basically. Like, as someone who was a little, 14, 12-year-old girl at one point in my life, we're kind of annoying. I'm still annoying. It's whatever. But the thing is, these characters will be so relentlessly hated on constantly by a particular corner of the fandom, 3 guesses as to which, and it causes the writers to kind of be like, oh, we need to change them. Or, alternatively, they don't, and that character continues to get completely unfounded hate for being annoying and immature. This is especially prevalent with the people who dislike Omega, but also with Ahsoka. But again, that's not what this video is about, so we're going to talk about it in relation to Omega. The people that didn't like Omega found her annoying and frustrating and immature. I would just like to restate, they found the presumably 12-year-old girl, but possibly younger, they found her to be immature. I want to repeat that again. They found the young girl to be immature and were then really excited and liked her so much more when she was more mature. Personally, I think you can probably tell what I'm implying here, but I don't really want to spell it out because it's gross, right? People wanting very young girls to be mature, to be like women, is deeply disturbing. Because really, as young girls, we are constantly told, oh, you need to grow up, you need to be a woman, be bigger. But then, as soon as you reach adulthood, you're told that you're getting on a bit in age, You should try, you should look a bit younger, It's really disgusting how the standard here is that women from a young age should be more mature, but then as soon as they get older, they're too old and cynical. They should really try to be more fun, let loose. It's disgusting, frankly. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but it's really gross. Anyway, I think that Omega's storyline, really, is about girls who have had their childhood stolen from them. Obviously, some people would say that's reading into it too much. But the thing is, this is a young girl who has been put into this situation of war. She's in the middle of a war. She's clearly very naive. She's been sheltered her whole life on Camino. She comes out. She doesn't even know what dirt is. She's very sheltered, very, naive and young in mind and body and everything else. She is young and she is full of life. And then by the end of the series, you see this, naivety and, youth basically just sucked out of her. By the time of season 3, there is something very wrong with Omega. You can tell she's no longer this happy-go-lucky, very, whimsical little girl, She's very clearly quite traumatized, and her childhood has just been ripped from her. She doesn't get to have that innocence anymore. And it's really sad. And I think that not enough people talk about it. Personally, I think it is one of the most devastating storylines in the entirety of Star Wars, of this young girl. It happens to so many characters in Star Wars. It happens to Omega, and we get to see it in real time. It's really disturbing that people see that, and they see it as a good thing. It isn't a good thing, and shouldn't be portrayed as such. But that's enough of me being depressing. We're gonna move on. Cool? Awesome. So Omega as a whole, her arc is very much related to growing up, gaining maturity, but also trauma and loss, and like not just loss of people and loss of like homes and all of these other material things, loss of your innocence and your childhood. It's a very compelling story, and I would argue one of the most well written in a very long time. I cannot stress enough how much I love this and how much I like wish that people appreciated it more. But I've been talking too long again, so we are going to move on to Crosshair. Crosshair was introduced to us alongside the other batches in season 7, episode 1. And before we get into this section, I have a confession to make. I originally did not like Crosshair. I know, I'm sorry, I'm a fake fan, I'm sorry, no. Okay, I have grown to like him. I have grown to love him because of the writing of the story, but from the start, I was not a fan of Crosshair. I, to put it lightly, thought he was right ass. So, the thing with Crosshair is, his arc is such a complicated one. He goes from this very cynical, like, downtrodden, really, like, I don't want to say emo girl, but, you know. Anyway, he starts off as the almost grounding force of the Bad Batch. He's constantly being like, ugh, whatever. Like, he's constantly saying, no, that's dumb, you're stupid. Like, he's this sarcastic, like, just asshole. he's just an asshole. But then he eventually, and I want to say spoiler warning, but if you're watching this video, you should have watched the show already. Okay. Anyway, he betrays them. Shocker. Crazy. I don't know. Whoa, what? He betrays them. And it is unclear as to whether this was due to his chip or not. The initial betrayal, yes, that was pretty much confirmed to be because of his chip, right? He decides that the Empire are the better route for him. You know, he remains loyal, you know? The other batches say, no, we're loyal to the Republic. We shouldn't trust this, like, random Empire. But Crosshair sees it as, oh, good soldiers follow orders. Something that he says so much. He betrays his brothers in favor of the Empire, and that sets in motion his whole arc. He spends the whole show battling with himself and kind of being like, oh, I want to remain loyal because I need to be a good soldier. But he neglects the fact that he has to be a good brother too. He eventually learns this, but by then he is locked up in Tantus and is being tortured. So that's fun. He does help Omega, and I think that really sets in motion his final release from Tantus and back into his brothers and the Bad Batch. Omega saves him, for want of a better word. She is the one who convinces him that he's worth saving, and this means that he goes back to his brothers, and while he and Hunter definitely tiff, you know, he still is accepted back because he realizes the error of his ways and is accepted back. Now, I know that some of the people watching this are going to be like, Hunter was wrong! Hunter sucks! He's bad! Crosshair was right! And to that I say, did you watch the show, right? The issue with the whole Hunter was right versus Crosshair was right debate is that I think the whole point is that they both had their flaws. Crosshair shouldn't have betrayed his brothers. He said that he got his chip removed a while ago. We don't know when that is, but we do know that he was still actively doing bad things after having his chip removed. Hunter also did some bad things. Hunter probably could have tried a little harder to try and get Crosshair back, but I don't want to hear any Hunter slander because there was problems on both sides. Cool? Awesome. They fight it out, right? And they both accept each other. There should not still be a Hunter was right, Crosshair was right. There should not be a back and forth anymore. They both were wrong. Cool. Awesome. And with that over, TLDR, Crosshair, themes of loyalty and blind loyalty. Obviously themes of family and acceptance and very much looking within yourself. He spends so much of the series kind of being like, oh, is this who I am? Is this who I want to be? So there's that. And then obviously loss. We'll get there soon, I promise. All right. Now with that over, we will move on to Tech. Oh, Tech. Tech was introduced to us along with the core 4 batch members in episode 1 of season 7 of the Clone Wars. As a character, Tech is obviously what would be labelled as the brains of the operation. His arc very much revolves around him kind of breaking out of his shell and learning to kind of be himself and not let the opinions of others kind of sway him. Now, Tech is very much the archetype of the autistic character. Now, I will not get into this too much because while it is relevant, and as a neurodivergent person, I am technically qualified to speak on this. I'm making a video essay on Star Wars. I've been diagnosed with autism and ADHD, so I am technically qualified to speak on this, but honestly, I think that if you are autistic and you relate to XYZ character and you say, hey, I'm autistic, I relate to this person, I think that they're autistic, that is so cool. You do that. Tech, obviously, he is the archetype of like the mega genius. And that is awesome. And honestly, it's great to have representation, but given that they don't confirm whether or not he's autistic, I am tedious on whether or not I want to actually say, oh, he's good autism representation. Also, it's very frustrating as someone who is autistic to like see this whole thing of like every single autistic character in a show is normally a man and normally is like the brainiac, like really smart, crazy smart person. And I appreciate that. That is so cool. There are definitely people like that. But personally, I don't always relate to those characters, and that's okay. But Tech, a lot of people say he is good representation, and so I will go with that general consensus from other people. Personally, I don't relate to him as much. I relate more to characters like Entrapta and a lot of the female characters, funnily enough. But yeah, very cool, awesome. Moving on. Tech's character, he very much spends a lot of the time trying to kind of assimilate into this new world that he has been thrust into. You know, as an autistic person, dealing with change is very hard. And Tech very clearly is not good with change. He struggles after Crosshair betrays them. He expresses as much to Omega. And then he also struggles a lot with the changes of like, they're no longer in the war. He no longer has to fight all the time. They're now on the run. And all of these rapid changes happening all at once. And he has to learn to cope with that. And I think that that is a really honorable story. And I personally, that is one part of Tech's character that I really relate to. Like that, oh boy, if I was thrust into that, I would be so lost. It would be so over for me. But yeah, and then he learns how to navigate like people, like with Fee. He suddenly has this whole thing where he's like, oh my god, woman? And he has to learn to live with that. He has to learn these things. And the real tragedy of Tech's story is that it's cut short. Because, again, if you haven't watched the show, why are you here? But anyway, spoiler warning, Tech dies in the cable car incident. His life, and therefore his arc, are cut short, and we don't get to see him really evolve and learn to function in a society that really isn't made out for him, you know? He has to learn all of these new things. He has to learn how to cope. and it's cut short, and that's the real tragedy of it. Obviously, him dying, very sad, but it is almost made worse by the fact that he doesn't get to have his closure. He dies protecting his family, but he doesn't get to actually continue on his life as he could have. He misses out on so many things. He doesn't get to see Omega grow up. He doesn't get to speak to Fee again. He doesn't get to learn to function in the new world that he has been thrust into. And that's really sad. But that does conclude this part. So, the TLDR, Tek's arc revolves around change, growth, and learning to function in a society that isn't really made for you. And honestly, I think that that is really amazing and that they did a very good job writing it. And I'm still absolutely glazing the writers of this show, but you know what? Deserved. Now we're going to move on to Echo. Echo is first introduced in season 1 of the Clone Wars alongside his brothers, the Domino Squad. Now, Echo isn't an original member of the Bad Batch, and this very much plays into his arc. He spends almost all of the Clone Wars and then all of the Bad Batch just trying to find a place to fit in, which, honestly, that pretty much sums up his arc. He spends his whole time on screen basically trying to fit in. First, it's with the Domino Squad. Not all of them appreciate his, very rule-following ideology. Like, he's constantly getting picked on. I mean, that's where he got the name Echo, is from echoing the reg manuals, and really, he doesn't quite fit in there. He then, with Fives, is initiated into the 501st Legion, where he, again, does kind of struggle to find his place. He knows his place is with Fives, but that doesn't work out, to say the least. And then when he eventually comes back, he no longer has Fives there to support him. He's lost his lifeline, for want of a better word. So rather than staying with Rex, he goes with the Bad Batch and attempts to find some comfort there. He wants to fit in with them because he feels separate from the other clones. But then it happens again with the Bad Batch. He doesn't feel like he's doing enough. He doesn't feel as though he is truly being himself. So he goes back to help Rex. It's this constant back and forth trying to find who he is and who he fits in with the best. And honestly, I find that quite interesting. I would also like to point out, a lot of people get really annoyed with Echo because when Omega got captured and taken to Tantus base, he separates from Wrecker and Hunter. Personally, I think that this makes sense. For Echo as a character, a lot of people say he wouldn't run away, he wouldn't abandon them like that. But the thing is, I think there's a lot of different ways that he would have justified going back to Rex. There's obviously the sentiment of he doesn't feel like he's helping. He feels like if he goes to Rex and he plans out a full-scale operation to liberate all of the clones on Tantus, he feels like he could be doing more, which is often his reasoning for doing things. He wants to do more. He wants to, explore, be better, do better. There's also the chance that it's because he just can't stand to be in the ship when Omega isn't there. A lot of people will say, oh, that's Hunter and Wrecker dealt with it. They kept trying. He gave up. Honestly, even Echo's character, I don't think he gave up. I don't think that's the case. I feel as though being in the ship that is devoid of Omega, because you have to remember, the Batches, they had experience before Omega. Echo had only been with the Batches for a little less than a year, I believe, by the time of the Bad Batch. And the thing is, he doesn't have that much experience of the ship without Omega, so her not being there would have seriously been, we don't know exactly how long Omega was with the Bad Batch, but we do know that it was most likely longer than Echo had been, separate from her. So her not being there would have felt very out of the ordinary. Also, I would like to point out some of the parallels between Omega and Fives. It's a loose theory. It's not the most solid one, but Omega, for one, her call sign within the group of the Bad Batch is Havoc 5. Interesting. She also shares a lot of common traits with him. She's very adventurous. She's constantly getting into trouble. She's this light-hearted, very naive and fun kind of character, while also having that ability to be serious when the time really calls for it. This is quite similar in a way to Fives. And because the Batches are so different from Fives, right? She is really the closest thing that Echo has to that relationship. So you could almost say that he has clung onto her in that kind of way. And losing her would have just reminded him he never got to say goodbye. So the very same thing happened with Omega. He didn't get to say goodbye. None of them did. And it's again, honestly, when you really look into this show, some of the stuff behind it is actually so sad. As a character, Echo isn't the kind to give up. I do not believe that he gave up on Omega. I think that he felt his time was more well spent trying to get all of the clones out and Omega. He's very much the needs of the many kind of person. But I've been talking too long again, so we are going to move on to Wrecker. Now, Wrecker, he's the last on this list, but he is not the least by any means at all. Wrecker was introduced to us, again, alongside the original 4 Batches in the first episode of Season 7 of The Clone Wars. Wrecker genuinely has to be one of the most misunderstood and underrated characters that I think there has ever been, honestly. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. He's very underrated and misunderstood. Wrecker is often sidelined by the fandom or just general, casual viewers of the show as the comedic relief character. He's just there to be funny and blow stuff up. But he is so much more than that. Wrecker begins the series as very much the little brother of the group, he's constantly messing around, they're always on his case, he gets little droid heads and he's like, look, Crosshair, I think this one likes you. He's very silly and fun and goofy. But this changes when Omega comes into the picture. He is no longer the younger brother. He doesn't get to be young anymore. He doesn't get to be a child. He has to grow up. And he does this for Omega. I personally think that the scene where he gives Omega Lula is so sweet. It makes me very emotional. It's this scene where he is kind of handing off his own ability to be a child to Omega, to let her have a childhood where she can feel sheltered and safe. He's giving up that so that she can experience it. This is why it makes me so upset when people, they dumb Wrecker down. They make him seem like this goofy, silly guy, which he is, but he also is a very emotionally complex character. He's not dumb. In fact, I would say he is a very smart person. I mean, you have to be very smart to know how to work with explosives. He isn't the stereotypical version of smart, but emotionally, he is one of the smarter people of the Bad Batch. Tech, yes, is an absolute genius. He could fix a ship in a second. Crosshair, brilliant sniper. He knows everything there is to know about sniping. He's very smart. Hunter, so smart with tracking. He knows everything he needs to know. They are all specialized in their areas. Wrecker, though, serves as not only the demolitions expert, but he honestly serves as the emotional conduit of the whole batch. He is the one to be there to support them and be like, hey, I get that you're sad, but we need to get this done and you can be sad after, He comes across as immature and childish, but he is one of the batches that is more in touch with their emotions. Rather than bottling them down, he isn't afraid to cry in front of Omega, for example. And it's so interesting, I mean, when Hunter and Wrecker are left alone, he is then the one to take on the role of telling Hunter that he needs to back up you know? He needs to take a step back and think before he just rushes into everything. And I think that's really admirable. And I think it's really, really diminishing to say that Rekka is just the comedic relief character, because there is so much more to him. Anyway, this section is getting so long, so we're going to move on to the themes now, if you'll just give me a moment, because I'm getting really, really hot. Okay, that was a lot of information to take on, so I'm going to give you a little brain break, right? Also, because it's so hot, I just had to tie my hair up and open a window. I'm still sweating like a pig. Australian summers are not for the weak. Anyway, while you're, I don't know, refilling your drink or something, I will talk about my plans, I guess. I plan to upload, I would say frequently, but I'm heading into my final year of high school, so that's probably not gonna happen. But it's gonna be mostly Star Wars stuff, but that might change. I think I'm also gonna try to dabble in some other things. I can hear a plane coming overhead right now, so I'm gonna have to close the window soon. Okay, brain break over. Time for the themes! Okay, so as you can probably tell, The Bad Batch is a TV series, and as a TV show, it's gonna have some themes, right? I want to talk about the 3 most prevalent ones. The first of these themes I want to talk about is the theme of found family. Personally, found family has to be one of, if not my favorite, tropes. It's, commonly, I don't know why I'm saying commonly, this is just what the trope is. It's when a group of people come together and, normally in an unlikely situation, they form a family, they work together, they start to get along, and they build a little family for themselves. The Bad Batch portrays this, obviously, through the joining of the Bad Batch, and then they take on Echo. Hunter's just constantly taking in strays. He has a real problem with that, clearly. They're constantly taking on new people. So first they take on Echo, and then they take on Omega, and then, Crosshair leaves, but they take him back in because he's family. And they also take on Batcha as well, who deserves a whole video of her own, honestly. My queen. But yeah, the found family trope is obviously very prevalent to the Bad Batch, just because of the way that it basically encapsulates the whole show. Honestly, I think that the reason that it is such a popular trope nowadays is because people really relate to it. Because whether or not you have an actual biological family, you also have, you could also be adopted, and then you have a family there. Or maybe you're a foster child and you've still got a family there, to a degree. Maybe you don't really have a paternal family, but you've got your friends. No one in this world is truly, absolutely alone. And I think that that's why the trope of found family is so comforting, is because it's familiar, Family, familiar, it's in the name. Like I said, no one in this world is truly alone. Even if you feel like you are completely alone in the universe, you never are. There's always someone out there who is willing to give you the time of day. There's always going to be someone who is willing to reach out and make sure that you are all right. And I think that that's why found family really sticks with some people, is because, again, it is relatable. It is something that everyone feels. Another key theme in The Bad Batch is that of betrayal and forgiveness. Now, I would say it's pretty obvious why this is a key theme, but we'll go over it again. Obviously, we have Crosshair, who betrays the Batch, but the thing is, he does betray them, but he's still family. They take him back in because they believe that he can change, that he can grow as a person and be better. This is very much, obviously, fitting into the theme of betrayal and forgiveness. It's this ability to move on from the horrible things that Crosshair has obviously done and see that he has changed and he has the ability to change. And it's quite beautiful, really. It's really great that we have that ability to see betrayal and forgiveness and be like, hey, it's cool. I mean, again, like I said earlier, I used to hate Crosshair. He was my number one op. I hated him. He was rude and an asshole and I didn't like him. But then, because of the writing of the show, he was forgiven. And that forgiveness then obviously stuck with me. And I was like, wow, okay, he's been through a lot. maybe he deserves another chance. And I think that ideology of like everyone deserves a second chance, maybe not a third and fourth and fifth and sixth and so on and so forth, but Crosshair was given a second chance and he took it, and he took it in full stride, you know? He really, like, he made a comeback. He came back from what was a terrible situation and made it better because he went back and he supported his family. And that betrayal and then that forgiveness is the key focus of the whole show. So, you know, very cool. It's shown through Crosshair and his ability to move back. Anyway, on to the next theme. So, the final theme I want to focus on, that being said, there are way more, is the theme of loss and coping with it. Now, this is a much more serious one, obviously, but I will try to at least slightly make light of it. Obviously, the loss here predominantly is Tech. So, the thing about it is, everyone reacts to loss and grief differently. Everyone grieves in a different way, and we see this so much with all of the batches. I mean, Omega, for one, she doesn't really get time to mourn. She's thrust immediately into Tantus and all of this stuff, and when it's all over, she is a shell of the girl she once was. And you even see that further on in the epilogue. She is very clearly a deeply troubled person. She is happy, but there's something behind it. She constantly feels the need to go out and do more, and this is something that is seen in almost all of the batches. They don't stop. When they're grieving, they kind of just keep going. They are on the go, constantly moving, and this inability to just stop and mourn is very prevalent throughout the whole series. Whenever something bad happens, they don't just stop and take the hit and let it sit within them. They just keep going, and that's their way that they grieve. There are other ways of grieving, obviously. You know, Fee, we don't know much about what happened to her after Tech's death, but by the time of season 3, she's clearly moved on to a degree. She can mention him without feeling that kind of pain. And it's really interesting to see how all of the batches kind of grieve. We don't get enough of it though, I feel. I will maybe talk about that more in the weaknesses of the show section, but I feel that there definitely could have been more of a covering of the actual grieving and the impact that the loss of Tech had on each of the individual batches, because it is something that is so prevalent throughout the show. But that's me, and that's the final thing. So we're going to move on to the next one, and I'm going to get an ice pack because it's like 30 degrees and I'm going to like boil. Got one of those little lunchbox coolers. So, now we're going to talk about what makes the show good, you know, the strengths of it, let's say. So, as discussed before, the theme of family and found family is very prevalent in this show, and as discussed before, that really helps people connect to the show. Me personally, I didn't watch this with my dad or my mum because I was a little too obnoxious about it, and they told me to shut up, but I did watch it with my little brother. And the both of us, even if he doesn't want to admit it, did bond over it. You know, we found a lot of fun in the kind of happy-go-lucky, but also like deeply devastating and disturbing themes in the show. I've also just realized that my door isn't closed, so I'm gonna go do that. Okay, we are so back. But yeah, I think that that feeling of relation to the characters and being able to be like, I relate to this character, really brings people closer to the show, you know? Being able to be like, oh, you know, you're so much like that character, or, oh, you're like that character, which is what I actually do with my friends a lot. I don't know if this is a common thing. I think it is. I hope it is. But, you know, you go around with different characters and you're like, oh my god, you're so much like them. Like, you know, me personally, I really relate to Omega, because as a young girl who, you know, was a young girl, having to, like, grow up really quickly, in her case, it's because of war, but in my case, you know, I had to mature quickly because in the society that we live in, women are constantly forced to mature very fast. Um, and, you know, now I try to just like live my life. I let myself be a kid because technically I still am a kid, you know? And I think that that relatability of the show really makes so many people love it, you know? That's what really draws people in. Another thing that really draws people into the show is the unique animation style. I know this is very much not like a personal thing anymore, like this is straying from what I've been talking about this whole time, but the animation style of The Bad Batch, whether you like it or not, is very unique. It is a unique and very interesting animation style that kind of has that similar feeling to the one in the Clone Wars. I need to take my hair down because it looks ridiculous. It has a very similar look to that of the Clone Wars. And it's interesting. It's visually very interesting and distinctive as well. Like I don't know if you know a whole lot about how the like shadows of characters being really iconic really helps with recognition, but a lot of the characters like Omega has a very like in season 1, she has a very distinctive silhouette. And Hunter as well, the hourglass figure, you know, the Rito build, and Rekka as well, all of them have a very like distinctive shadow, you know? And this really helps with bringing in more audiences because, like, you know, you see the character and you're like, oh my god, that's that character from that thing. Maybe I should watch it. And the distinctive animation style also sets it apart from other shows. It's a very visually appealing one, if I do say so myself. I really like it, you know. I mean, maybe it looks a bit janky to some people. I mean, I know a friend of mine really, really hates the animation style. But personally, I find it really nice. So, you know, I would say that also really helps. And then the final thing, or not actually final, but one of the final, more prevalent things that really draws people in is the feeling of nostalgia. Like, you know, I, like so many others, grew up, like, waking up every morning excited. I would run out to go and see the newest episode of the Clone Wars on the TV. And so many people that watch this now grew up like that also. Like, I used to run out and, like, pray that I hadn't missed it, you know? Because the thing is, a lot of Americans will preach about going home from school and watching it, but as an Australian, it was in the morning for me. I'd wake up nice and early to go and see Ahsoka Tano with her dual lightsabers. And so many of these people have experienced that. And then The Bad Batch, you know, waiting every single Wednesday for the new episode really, like, it made people feel like that again. It brought them that same sense of nostalgia, of, like, waiting for the new episode. They'd get so excited. And I think that that is where The Bad Batch really went right. So many of the new Star Wars projects get relentlessly hated on, predominantly, I think, because people are chasing that same feeling of nostalgia that they got from the old projects, and they don't feel that anymore. And it scares them and frustrates them, and so they end up hating the new stuff. But, you know, now with The Bad Batch, that was very similar to the Clone Wars. So many of the people who enjoyed that really enjoyed The Bad Batch. And also because The Bad Batch was in the Clone Wars. And, you know, I think that that is predominantly why it was so successful. But I can't glaze it too much, so we're going to move on to the weaknesses. So one of the more prevalent weaknesses that the show does have is Tech and Echo, right? They have a bit of an issue with Tech and Echo being quite similar characters. They're both kind of like the tech geniuses, like they both repair the ship all the time. Personally, I think it's really cool to have two characters that are kind of the techie, fun ones, but, you know, in fact, I had a friend for a while there who thought that Tech and Echo were, like, each other. They thought that Tech was Echo and Echo was Tech. And it's that kind of weird little bit in there of, like, you need to find just the right balance to have those two characters be properly distinguishable from each other. And they didn't quite get there for some people, which is understandable, you know? But also, that's not that big of a shortcoming, and they did kind of, I think, try to remedy it by not having Tech and Echo be in as much of the show with each other, which I think is a missed opportunity, but That's me. So there were some complaints about that, but that's not that big of a deal. The final thing, which I personally have the most of an issue with, is the fact that season 3 felt really rushed. It felt incomplete. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. It felt as though there was more to be said. There were a lot of storylines that just kind of didn't end up getting wrapped up. And it also just kind of like felt strange. I mean, they put a lot of emphasis on TX2, for example. So many people, honestly, myself included, were like, oh my god, TX2 is going to be tech. And then that didn't end up happening, which is okay, but they put a lot of emphasis on them. And honestly, it kind of feels like it was probably a misdirect, trying to draw our attention. There was this whole mystery, people being like, oh my god, I think Tech is alive, oh my god, who is he gonna be, oh my god, where is he? Again, myself included. But honestly, I think overall, it's not the worst thing ever that Tech is actually dead. It does bring that much more of a sting to the show. There's not that closure. You don't get the closure because we don't see a body. Because for some reason, the rule in Star Wars is that if you don't see a body, they're probably alive. But it's a shame that it felt so rushed. A lot of people were saying it felt like they had planned a 4th season, but didn't have the time to do it. I mean, it's also frustrating because I think that a lot of the reason that it ended up feeling so rushed is because there were a lot of complaints from other sides of the fandom that the Bad Batch there was too much filler in it. They were complaining that it was predominantly filler, which I don't actually think is true. I think that a lot of the so-called filler was actually building quite a lot on the more emotional character building aspects of the characters. I don't think that filler truly exists in shows like this. Yes, there are definitely shows where filler is a thing, where they just do random stuff for no reason, but there are so many shows where people will claim it's full of filler, it's so silly, but then if you actually watch those episodes, it's actually expanding a lot on these characters. So while season 3 does definitely feel quite rushed, I think that it is in part at the fault of some of the fans of the show. But that's just my 2 cents. Move on. I do want to quickly stop before I end the video and just talk about what the show actually means to me, because I have kind of sprinkled in little bits and pieces here and there, but you know, this is my first video, and my first video being on the Bad Batch is significant because this show, you can ask any of my friends and family, I don't shut up about it. It's such an important thing to me because I just feel like it's a part of me. Like, that feels really stupid and cringe and like dumb to say, but it is such an important show to me because I see myself in Omega and I see myself in like almost all of the characters. It's just something that I relate to on such a deep level, and I basically got to grow up with the characters. The same thing happened with Ahsoka as well in the Clone Wars. Like I said, I basically grew up with them. Like, this show has been there. I was like 12 when I started watching it. No, I wasn't 12. When did it come out? Whatever. I was quite young when it started coming out. And it's that kind of feeling of like, oh, I have been here with it for years. It is something that spanned over years. I like barely remember a time when the Bad Batch wasn't around. And obviously that is not the same for other people, you know. I'm young, I'm full of youth, I'm ready to go, not an adult yet, so, you know, really, it's like everyone has their like childhood show, but this is almost mine. Clone Wars is probably my actual childhood show just because I watched that when I was little, but this is something that I am very passionate about and I really like a lot, and that's why I kind of wanted to start my channel with this, because it's really important to me and I'm going to keep talking about it because it's really cool. Anyway, I'm going to say goodbye now. TLDR, very good show. highly recommend if you haven't watched it. I don't know why you're watching this video if you haven't watched The Bad Batch, but you should watch it because it's very good. But with that out of the way, this is the end of the video. I actually did it, and I made a video and I posted it. I'm kind of in shock a little bit, but I hope that my sound wasn't too horrendous because I tried to get a mic that worked for this for like hours. I was trying to get the mic to work and it didn't work, and so I just had to resort to using a headphone mic. So I hope that it isn't an absolute affront on your ears. Also, there have been planes flying overhead this whole time. I'm sorry. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I hope I wasn't boring, and I do plan on making more videos. I don't know what my next one will be. In fact, maybe, I don't think that like anyone is gonna watch this, but if people do watch it, then you should say in the comments what I should do for my next video. I don't know how that's gonna work out, but I definitely want to talk about the Empire, and how I cannot defend the Empire ever. So that's definitely one that I would like to do, as well as I would really love to talk about some of the problems in this fandom, because oh my god, there are so many. There's so many bigots, so many, they're everywhere. I can't go 2 seconds without being told to go make a sandwich. It's terrible. I definitely want to talk about Ahsoka more in depth. I'd love to do some stuff on other franchises. I also watch Young Justice. I've been really hooked on House MD recently, but honestly, I don't think I can talk about that show because it's so mind-numbing. I'm also into Hunger Games and, DC in general. I also might make some content around armor, because I've been making a Mandalorian helmet out of EVA foam, which I've been posting on TikTok. Go to my TikTok if you want to see more of me yammering and yapping and doing stupid stuff. It's, I believe, the same name. I'll put it up on screen. I'm also probably going to open up an Instagram page, just so that I can do like polls and stuff on new videos. This all feels a bit ambitious, but it's my first video. I can do what I want. It's okay. I'll be fine. Anyway, I hope that you had a good time watching this. Good afternoon, morning, evening, night, noon, whatever. And I'm sure I'll figure out how to do an intro and an outro eventually, I promise. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.